if the bunker isn't ready, if the facility isn't ready, the customer says, oh, darn, I'm going to need another 3 months, 6 months, just, hold the order for me. And Varian is getting in more orders and may have shortages for some other customers where something didn't get delivered on time. And now there's a whole process of cannibalization that takes place, deallocating and even disassembling some parts of equipment that was ready to go.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Committed inventory and allocation are perhaps the most complex processes to master in the ERP world, but they are critical after a certain point in your growth. If you don't have committed inventory processes figured out, you might not be able to reserve for key customers. Every department may create ad hoc arrangements to preserve its inventory, and that might result in inventory accuracy issues. But for the committed inventory processes to work, you must have your inventory in order. So where do you start in your journey of committed inventory and how to get it right? In today's episode, we invited a panel of cross-functional experts for a live interview on LinkedIn who brings significant expertise to discuss committed inventory and allocation best practices. We discussed why commitment is important for inventory and how the commitment might vary in different industries where the inventory may be allocated at the lot or style level. Finally, we discussed complex inventory allocation processes such as available to promise, reallocation, and disassembly after allocation. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you are joining for the first time, this is part of our digital transformation series for every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to digital transformation, and we always have an expert panel that is willing to share their insights and wisdom. For today, we have a very interesting and complex topic. It's called committed inventory. It's very, very, very hard to get it right. So we are going to have a lot of fun discussing that. Before we do that, we are going to start with everybody's intros. I am going to start with my intro. If you don't know me, I am Sam Gupta, principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm, and committed inventory is probably going to be the first thing that customers come to us because they cannot figure this out. So on that note, I am going to move to Dave Griffith for his intro.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Griffith. I run a company called Kaplan Solutions. I like to say that we focus on sensible digital transformation. So that is where operational excellence kind of connects with technology. And it is very much where the rubber meets the road when we talk about many of these things. So we do lots of work on inventory. I have a few thoughts, more than a few thoughts on inventory. So I'm excited to get into it. Thank you, Sam.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Dave. And we are going to run into Dave and Dave problem back to back, I guess. Last week we had and today as well. Okay, on that note, Abu, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure, thanks, Sam. My name's Abu. Glad to be here on the panel again. So we are a Sage X3 partner. We help digitally transform companies in distribution, industrial manufacturing, food and beverage, and chemical sector. Been doing that for the last 15 years, and inventory management is a key topic for most distribution and manufacturing. So glad to be here and share some.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Abu. Dave Chrysler, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Chrysler, and I own an operations consulting business working with manufacturing leaders on helping them create systems to achieve operational excellence. And excited to be here with everybody and chat about inventory.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And if you're in the audience and joining for the first time, make sure you guys post your questions and comments. We typically cover them during the show. If we cannot get to them, then our panelists are going to make sure that you receive your answer. On that note, I am going to start with the first question. And the first question is going to be for Dave Griffith, and just overall setting up the stage about what committed inventory really is. Commitment could mean a lot of different things across the when we look at commitment and committed inventory. Also, when you have multiple systems processes, it could be a lot of fun. So do you want to just set the stage, Dave Griffith?
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. So I spent a not insignificant amount of time thinking about just this question as we were running up to the show. So I think that I will give the perspective from the facility itself. I know that there are a bunch of ERP people here. As I didn't mention, I am not an ERP person, right? So I'm typically not the ERP person on these WBS Rocks shows. So on the committed inventory side, I think of committed inventory as we have inventory, it comes into a warehouse, right? And then at some point, it gets committed to an order as to if it's one of many items that are going to get shipped out, or if it's one of many items that are going to come in and we're going to run it through a process, and then it's going to create an end product and run it out. So when I talk about committed inventory, it's very much, it owns and it belongs to a particular order. As to if I've seen kind of committed inventory and allocated inventory go a couple of ways, right? So I've seen things get ordered for a specific order, and then they get committed within a system. I've also seen, items physically being pulled off of shelves and set with orders. And I guess kind of my last first comment on committed inventory, Sam, is there are many, many ways to commit inventory. The only wrong way for committed or allocated inventory is to not commit or allocate inventory. And if I may, a story to kind of continue on. So the story does come to me secondhand. But I was working with a group. This group was going and working, and there is a process that a lot of raw materials run through. And so at one point, one of the gentlemen walks over and talks to a person sitting at a desk with a big stack of papers and asks what she's doing. And she's like, "Oh, I'm going through to see if we have everything for the order." And so she went through every order manually to go check the inventory levels, and it was all on paper. And Sam, the next day, she did exactly the same thing, and she started all the way from the very beginning. And in fact, we had been doing it for 27 years that way, of very much not committing anything. That is the biggest example of non-commitment of probably anything I have ever seen in my entire life. But so kind of long story short, there are computers that only can make this process easier. And at some point, an 8 or a 10-hour day went down to about 45 seconds of pressing a button and seeing what orders we could run and learning that we can commit inventory.
Okay, amazing insights there. And there is a reason why I started with the non-ERP guy, because you are going to be the user and you are going to have the real problems that are going to be caused by non-committed inventory. Now, to your point about everybody should be doing committed inventory, I think that's what I heard in your commentary. But in my experience, I don't think 90% of the businesses have figured out or can figure out how to do the committed inventory, because it's going to be really, really hard. Number one, what is going to be required for committed inventory to work is it's going to be the inventory alignment in all of the systems. Okay. And if anything is going to be off with your data, your inventory is probably going to be off across the system. And if you cannot get it right, then obviously your committed inventory processes are not going to be right as well. Now, to your paper story, committed inventory also have one of the most fun stories that I have personally seen. So in your case, they were keeping the paper. In my case, this was a paper business, in which case the person was actually storing paper right by them. And I was like, okay, why are you storing these paper? And they were like, okay, I'm trying to reserve for my customer. The customer is going to fire us if we don't have that. So committed inventory stories are always going to be fun. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. So Abu, I'm actually going to move to you. I don't know if you have any sort of stories that you might be able to share related to committed inventory. And maybe if you have anything to add based on what Dave said. on the process.
I mean, so what Dave, said was a, great example of committed inventory. I'll just expand a little bit more on it. So you have two levels of inventory commitments. One is a high level. You have 10,000 kilograms of some chemical in it, and then you can go to the next level saying this particular lot is committed to a particular order, right? So that will be a detailed level of inventory commitment. The other thing is, Dave talked about from the sales perspective, you can commit inventory that this is for sales perspective, but if you're a manufacturing organization, you can commit inventory on the raw material side as well, saying this is where, on which manufacturing work orders it will go to, or you get from a project-based industry, this is a particular raw material for a particular end product for a particular end customer. Inventory commitment is always extremely hard. You can plan a lot, you can commit inventory. One of my best stories is we were in a chemical plant. They did all this detailed work, allocating inventory to various orders for manufacturing. But on the shop floor, when the guy is going to pick up a chemical drum, he just picks up the drum in front of him, right? He never goes and hunt for the right lot number or anything like that, right? So that's where most of it goes out, because just finding the right, when you get to that detailed allocation, finding the right lot number can be a lot of hard work. So that's where a lot of those, screw ups happen in the allocation. So
Okay, amazing insight there, and could not agree more. I think you definitely brought a very interesting layer there about the lot level control, and that's going to be a different ball game altogether when you are looking at commitment of the inventory. By the way, I'm going to add one more layer there. So here, let's say if you are simply going to be lot controlled, then it's still easier. But if you are in business such as your apparel business or the style business, then you are looking at least 5 or 6 different variables, and each of them could drive the commitment process. For example, your fabrication, style, color, size. And when you are committing the inventory, if I am going to be committing, let's say the XXL for Dave Griffith, who's super lean and slim, he's probably not going to be very happy about it. So that's why the commitment of inventory becomes really fun when you are dealing with these. So on that note, before I move to Dave Chrysler, I am going to give an opportunity for Tom to introduce first, and then I'll come back to Tom back. Tom, do you want to introduce first?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself and I'll apologize. So this is a second time it's happened to me where I had some trouble logging in. So apologies to everyone for disrupting things. I'm Tom Rodden. I am former CIO of Varian Medical Systems, so in the life science industry for many years, now serving as an ERP consultant, and really happy to be here and talk about today's topic.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Tom. So Dave, I am actually coming to you. So I don't know if you are going to have any sort of context that you might be able to add with respect to commitment. You can share your story or address this question that the user is asking. If you want, I can read it, or if you want yourself, you can read it as well, so that listeners know what we are talking.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Now, first, I'll kind of just tie a couple of things together from my standpoint, kind of, touching on what Dave and Abud said. But I think the biggest challenge that I've seen consistently when it comes to inventory commitments is the fact that when you don't have a good handle on the process of sales orders and work orders, they end up hanging out there, which obviously is going to impact that committed inventory amount. And it just continues to, rear its ugly head. When we're talking about trying to do forecasting, when we're trying to do, anything else that really touches the supply chain side, especially on the raw material side of things, it just ends up getting really ugly. And back to what Dave said, people are then going out and physically checking these things, and they're doing it on a daily, sometimes multiple times per day, because, we can't trust the system. Well, why can't we trust the system? Because, we haven't gone through and made sure that there is process alignment in the system. It's not the technology's fault that, people aren't executing the process and we don't have a great handle on it. So I wanted to, at least talk about that. And it really brings your point in about the multiple systems and the inventory alignment across those. So if we're talking about ERP and e-commerce, let's say, and where does that source of truth lie? And then how, not only does that inventory get committed, how does it then get tied back into the other systems where, again, that source of truth, comes into play. So that is why this is such a challenge for something that on the surface seems relatively simple, right? When you look at, well, what's it committed inventory? I mean, the classic definition is relatively simple, but this is those are the things that make this all that more challenging. And in terms of the question, let me just read it. So we've got a question: how do we reserve inventory against the customers in the warehouse? This is also a big issue. So I don't know, my takeaway, and I'd love to hear if anybody else has any input on this, but my takeaway is maybe to what we were just talking about with multiple systems potentially having some source of truth issues here. Because again, if we're talking about a single system and being able to, reserve that inventory, commit that inventory, it's going to happen at either the sales order level, it's going to happen at the work order level, depending on what those processes look like, how those orders are flowing in. And again, if we're talking multiple systems, if that's happening on the e-commerce side, that's obviously going to impact it. So where does that inventory live? So source of truth, where does that inventory get committed? So how do those sales orders come in? How do those, if it's a made to order or something, how do those work orders tie into that? But I'd love to open it up if anybody has that. That's kind of my interpretation of what Suresh is asking, but happy to clarify if there's some more details added in.
Okay, so amazing insights there. By the way, I really like the layer that you have added related to the sales order and work order. I think the problems are going to be there as well, depending upon how your processes are going to set up. And I also want to touch on the question a little bit. So here, and by the way, Missy, I would love to hear insights from Tom as well, because he has a lot of background, from the SAP perspective. So since we are moving next to Tom, obviously we are going to be talking about that. But before we do that, so one of the reasons why, in my experience, this is going to be a big issue when I compare ERP system 1 to 2, the ERP systems that are going to be designed for more of the retail and vision, they are slightly better in doing the processes that are going to be at the warehouse. Okay, the manufacturing systems in general, they are not as good when you look at things like price and discount at the warehouse level. When you talk about replenishment strategies at the warehouse level, when you talk about that warehouse and SKU correlation, typically they are not as good. But if you look at the distribution ERP system and the majority of the mainstream ERP system, when we talk about SAP, Microsoft, they are going to be slightly more distribution centric. So they are probably going to have a lot more functionality in reserving this. So it should not be as much of an issue. But again, depending upon how the implementation is done. So now I am actually coming to Tom. And Tom, you have three things that you can cover. Number one is going to be whatever has been spoken. If you have any sort of contact that you would like to add, that's number one. Number two, story or this question.
Well, thanks, Sam. So I come at this whole topic as the end result. Allocation and commitment is the end result of an inventory optimization strategy. And inventory optimization is even a bit of a misnomer in that it's really a business optimization strategy. You're trying to balance fulfilling orders or fulfilling work orders or fulfilling production orders, whatever, however you define the customer and the objective here, to the maximum extent possible, taking into account the cost of inventory. And that might be the cost of procuring the materials, of course, but also the cost of storing them. You could have a ton of inventory, even if it's cheap. If it takes up a lot of space, you're going to be paying for warehouse space. You have, of course, money in the inventory. It's essentially dead money waiting to be used, sold, and it is an opportunity cost, if you will. If your money's sitting in inventory, you can't use it in some other way. So, and there's kind of a holding cost or an interest effectively that you're paying on that if you've borrowed it, whether it's actual debt or the cost of capital from a finance sense. But there's a cost to having a lot of money tied up in inventory. So I come at it saying every business needs to come up with its own optimization algorithm, if you will. And I don't mean to talk jargon or complex words. It's not that complicated. You have to come up with your policy. If you're in a business that is extremely competitive, brand is everything. Customer loyalty is constantly at risk. you probably need to hold a lot of inventory, because if you start missing orders, you're going to lose those customers. And the cost of losing those customers is likely to be more damaging to you financially and to the business operationally in the long run than holding some additional inventory and having some excess. On the other hand, if you're in a very stable business, I worked for GE for many years. I was in one phase of my career in the lighting part of the business. Light bulbs is a pretty stable business. It grows with GDP. It grows with the housing market. You don't need more light bulbs than you have outlets to put them in, right? So the stability of that led to a really, really intense focus on minimizing inventory. Anything more than absolutely necessary when you had a pretty stable stream of demand was waste. And so that was, and you could do a pretty good job forecasting, which in many businesses and industries you can't, and so on. So the models and the businesses are so different at times that it drives a different policy about how much inventory do you want to hold. Are you really trying to minimize cost? Are you really trying to optimize the fulfillment of orders? And striking the right balance for your business then defines how you should be executing an allocation or a commitment strategy, in my opinion. So again, we can talk about ERP systems and how they have different algorithms to do that. But to me, it starts all the way up there with, what's the nature of your business and your strategy and what are you trying to optimize? If you've got a pretty good handle on that, then I think you can begin to play with things like SAP's ATP functionality, right? Where you could set it up so that it's pretty generic and it's just first come, first serve. Order comes in, inventory gets committed. You could set it up so that it's got a customer prioritization. I have my Walmarts, I have my major customers whom I do not want to miss a single order for. I'll hurt maybe in terms of missing orders some of the smaller guys, but I won't lose my big high value customers. And so I'll prioritize the ATP to run, giving allocations to those customers first, even if their orders came in after some others. They're further back in the queue, so to speak, right? So there are ways to manage the tools and configure the tools to get the results that you want in many cases. So that's kind of, for me, the first aspect of all this. And in terms of stories, I mentioned at the beginning, I come for the last 15 years out of the healthcare industry. I'm in not an apparel and retail type of business, right? I'm in a large capital equipment business, big machines, 5,000 plus parts, very complex, pretty much make to order. And people tend to think of this question about allocation and commitment in a little more of a make to stock sense traditionally or commonly. But in a make to order business, this is potentially a big issue as well. Sometimes maybe even a bigger issue. When Varian would have customers, hospitals and clinics, place orders, and maybe it's a 2-year lead time on this piece of equipment. It's designed custom for them. It's built for them. The product is procured specifically for them. And there are common parts, but it was specifically procured for them. And in that window, the hospital is building a new facility. They are going to be able to put these new pieces of equipment, radiation therapy equipment that Varian would manufacture, into these cells, these bunkers, which would shield the rest of the world from the radiations the machines would generate, because that's what's used to treat the cancer, and only the patient should be subject to that. But if the bunker isn't ready, if the facility isn't ready, the customer says, "Oh, darn, I'm going to need another 3 months, 6 months. Just hold the order for me." And Varian is getting in more orders and may have shortages for some other customers where something didn't get delivered on time. And now there's a whole process of cannibalization that takes place, deallocating and even disassembling some parts of equipment that was ready to go in order to fulfill another order, another machine to complete it that a customer is willing to take right away. So you can imagine, the complexity of that. The production order was complete. The machine is sitting ready, waiting to go. Now we're going to start to take it apart and put those materials back into inventory to serve, the production order for another customer. And And you have to create a new partial production order now to fulfill or complete the order eventually for the customer who delayed receipt of the equipment. So, I mean, these are incredibly complex and messy deallocation, reallocation scenarios that some businesses in the make to order world have to deal with.
Yeah, love the details, love the story. And before I move to Dave Griffith, Tom, do you want to clarify what SAP ATP is, if the listeners might not be familiar with that?
So in the simplest terms, ATP is available to promise. So it is essentially the algorithm in SAP that is used to commit inventory. There is a certain amount of a certain product available in stock, 100 pieces, and orders come in 20 units, 20 units, 20 units, 5 orders, and all that inventory is now consumed. A 6th order comes in for 20 units, and there's nothing left available to promise. So ATP then says, okay, I will look out beyond available inventory. What's available to promise after inventory? Well, maybe it's a production order that's scheduled, and I see that scheduled to be complete on, a week from now. And therefore, I'll say for the first 5 orders that came in for 20, they're available immediately, today, tomorrow, and maybe we add a couple of days for shipping. So we promised the customer 2-3 days from now. For the customer, the 6th customer who came in, nothing is available in inventory to promise, but there's something available in production that's a week away, and then maybe add your shipping lead time, and so call it 10 days. And that customer will get a acknowledgement or a promise back of 10 days. So the available to promise algorithm takes into account available inventory, production. Maybe you're actually procuring this from a third party. You don't build it, you buy it, right? So you have purchase orders out there. So it'll take into account the purchase orders, etc. So it's looking at all of these things. And then, of course, as I said, you could make it simple. Okay, first come, first serve. Or you could create greater complexity, prioritizing customers, prioritizing regions of the world, and so forth. And of course, you can create lots more complexity with multiple stocking points and a hierarchical level of warehouses, where you've got a central warehouse, maybe it ships slow-moving goods that you keep stored centrally, and you have the fast movers in many locations. You can create all kinds of logistical complexity that will make this ATP algorithm a little more challenging. But that's available to promise is the basic concept.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tom, for that. So Dave Griffith, I'm actually coming to you, and you have 3 options that you can choose. And number 1 is going to be comments over comments. Number 2 is going to be story. And if you have any insights over this question that we have, I think it's a very important and relevant question for the topic. Dave Griffith.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I would like to start with kind of Suresh's question that we have down here, because I think it is very important. And I think it kind of goes down to the conversation that we've been having as to, is it inventory specific for a customer? Is it inventory specific for an order? How fast moving is the inventory? How important is the inventory? As Abu kind of made the point earlier, it very much becomes everything is good, and then you get on the plant floor, and then you don't really know what's going to happen no matter what you wrote down into your work order, right? And I feel like I can make that joke because I've probably made that mistake and done all of the sins that anyone could possibly do on the plant floor myself. And so I've seen a number of ways to do it, depending upon how soon you're going to move, and depending upon how important it is for the customer. Everything from what I would not suggest is the salesperson or someone going and physically removing it from stock in the warehouse in order to go put it on their desk to make sure that their customer can have it. I've seen special bins and special allocation locations as to we're moving it out of one particular area so that we can make sure that this customer is pulled specifically from this location. There are a number of different ways in order to make sure that you reserve the inventory. I would kind of back to one of my original points, and very much to Tom's point, is pick a direction in which you want to go and make sure that you are going to continue down that direction. And I will say to Dave's earlier point that if you're trying to put very specific information on a very tiny little work order, additional special instructions within some sort of pick ticket, absolutely do not expect them to, because unless it is glaring at you in red and flashing colors, if it is not something that that normally gets read, don't expect that it's going to get read for your 1 in 1,000. Don't expect that it's going to get read in your 1 for 1,000. Item that you're looking to ship to the customer. And I would like to thank Tom for his story about ripping apart perfectly good machines and then deallocating it and reallocating it. And Tom, I'm happy that you're here, because that is the last thing in the world that I would possibly want to do. I feel like every production manager is weeping right now, thinking of the last time that they had a perfectly running facility or perfectly running machine, and they just want to look and be like, can't we ship it, or can't we charge them to hold this floor space as opposed to ripping apart my perfectly good machine? That is a worst case scenario, but something that sadly happens all the time.
Yeah, it's nuts, but it happens. Yeah.
It does. If people want to pay for equipment, in fact, they may be charging them for floor space and also ripping apart the machine because they don't need it for another. But that is a story for an absolutely other time. And then I would like to get back to the point that Abu had made earlier about kind of everything is good up until the point that you get to the production floor. And then kind of all heck can break loose. I think it's very dependent upon what industry you're in. So some industries are very particular for lots. So a lot of pharmaceuticals, a lot of aviation and aerospace, very much automotive. Like you have to go and track everything that you are currently running very specifically for the vehicle, for the pharmaceutical grade in and of themselves. And I would say that is where I have personally found, or at least I hope people have much more strict systems. I see a lot of barcode scanning, kind of other things in and out. In a number of other systems or facilities, I see people kind of just ripping and pulling whatever is the closest, and that is what I find can absolutely cause and wreak havoc to inventory. And you think you know what you have, and then pretty soon our production folks or our procurement folks are cycle counting 4 or 5 times every day because they don't trust the system. So to the point of trusting the system, I think before you can go and make a choice on what you want to allocate to inventory, or until you can have an inventory allocation system, you need to have a system that everyone trusts, at least to the extent that anyone can trust software and systems. I'll go ahead and leave it there and let everyone else jump in.
So, Dave, I am going to have a little comment there. So, let's say if we are working in the same warehouse and I have kept this big bold sticker with the note that, Dave, this is the committed inventory for me. Are you not going to respect that? Is it not committed? Are you going to tell me that it's not going to be committed?
Sam, the things that I have seen are, one, almost certainly not appropriate for this PG-13 rated show that we're doing. And I doubt, well, maybe a bunch of people on here would believe, but a bunch of your listeners would not believe. If it can go wrong, I've seen it go wrong. And as I said in the beginning, I will make that comment because I, in various parts and various pieces of my career, have probably caused many of these mistakes to happen. So as we go and look at that, we need it as foolproof as possible, and then we need to make it 10 times better, because if you think there's no way anyone could make that mistake, you're probably sitting in a nice carpeted, air-conditioned location and not thinking about the person sweating in the unair-conditioned warehouse trying to just ship the order to be able to move forward.
Amazing. Love it. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. So, Abu, I'm actually coming to you, and you have the same options. Comment over comments, any sort of story, and the question, if you might have any sort of...
Yeah, I mean, I just, on my earlier example, and, even in controlled industries, right, where you have to track lots, a big problem comes in, you have allocated to a work order, sales order, you have the lot which is easy to pick, you pick it up, you deallocate the original sales order, and then you and then you use the new one, right? So that's the biggest problem. And when you're producing, especially in a higher, high cycle manufacturing like plant, like chemical, food manufacturing, you have a big order from Walmart coming. you're in a big rush to produce all of that and pick all of the raw materials. So it's very hard to enforce, at least in mid-sized companies, that you ask your picker to go in and remove the first, let's say 10 sacks of nuts and then go pick the sack at the end to make, for example, peanut butter jam, right? So that's the biggest problem that comes up. In the food industry, for example, you want to use first expired, first out systems, right? Food gets expired, you don't want food ending up bad, sitting at the back. But even then, it becomes hard, unless you have a supervisor or a management team that is really focusing on it, crushing down on those things. It becomes hard to, enforce that discipline in mid-sized industries, at least from my perspective. So it's always, extremely hard. These things you design the best systems, and then another customer comes in, which has suddenly become the strategic customer, where you have to fulfill that order, right? All of your planning and your rules and your mechanisms go away, right? I've even seen in $300-400 million firms where business is based on a lot of relationships where it's owner controlled, for example, and the other strategic buyer, the large buyer, which is also owner controlled. And one owner calls the other owner and they want their order delivered first, right? So all the rules go out of the window. So fairly large organizations, but then all that commitments and it become hard to manage, right? It's hard to say no to the owner or no to your strategy. So it's an interesting topic, lots of complexities, lots of unknown complexities also depending on.
Yeah, in my experience as well, I have never had been able to find answers for any sort of politics, and in this particular case as well, I just
Yeah.
will not have any answer.
Mm.
Abu, in this particular case, I mean, I don't know if you're going to have any sort of insights with this comment that Sneha is making. Configuring the setup in the ERP system is the real challenge. Do you agree with this statement? Do you think it's going to be a challenge? It's not going to be a challenge.
I mean, it depends on the system and the complexity of how you can configure it. I think configuring is the easier part. It's now once you've configured it and the system allocates something, and now you have to figure out why did it allocate this. That's the harder part, right? Then you have to go down and backtrack all those scenarios that are happening in a past history, right? So you allocated product 3 days ago, but now you want to figure out why did it allocate this product. It doesn't make any sense. Now you're trying to reconstruct those rules from 3 days ago, all the inventory positions. That's the harder part, for most front end users rather than the actual.
Yeah,
But
no,
again, depend on every ERP system. I'm not sure which ERP system she is using, but they can be complex to relatively easy to.
could not agree more. And Sneha, if you have any other details there that you might be able to provide, either related to the ERP system or what specific challenges that you have faced, we would be more than happy to answer those questions to you. So now, Dave, I am coming to you. And, I don't know if you're going to have any sort of insights on this question or any other questions. You have already covered one question. And this is, this is a very interesting question right here.
I think Sneha really nailed it right on the head with this. And it ties everything together that we're talking about. I mean, Abu just had some really great examples of this too, right? You can have the best, kind of best documented processes. You can have the system, fine tuned in terms of the configuration, but there's not going to be a lot that you're going to be able to do from a systemization standpoint to impact the politics of people, whether that's, two owners kind of duking it out, whether that is two sales reps or customer service or two warehouse people that want to put a big gold sticker and shining lights and caution tape all over what they, deem allocated in the warehouse. I mean, those are all real world challenges. And kind of back to what Tom was saying too, when it comes to, having to dismantle things and have to, unallocate and reallocate, and the complexity behind that. It's an interesting takeaway because, again, it just adds to the layered complexity where, back to the point I was trying to make earlier, when you look at what's committed inventory and you answer that question, on the surface level seems very simple, very straightforward, but there are so many layers to peel back, and understanding what do you need the information for, what are you going to do with it, how does it impact the rest of your operation and business systems. That to me, and I think Tom maybe kind of touched on that with, understanding what your algorithm needs to be. To me, that's, kind of just another way to say it. Like, what what do we need to do with the information? How is it going to help us from a business case standpoint? And, making sure then that the processes and that the technology is aligned with that goal so you can actually do something with it. One other thing I'll throw out there when I mentioned the open work orders, open sales orders, I didn't talk about open purchase orders, partial completions, right? All of these things touch this process. So again, I go back to, what do we need to do with the information? What are we trying to, to glean, to gain? How is it going to impact future decisions? And, once you can understand that and put that into the context of what you see from, kind of what is the system telling you, then I think you can start to unpack some of these and maybe make it a little bit more tangible for most people. I think there's obviously varying levels of complexity to Abu's point, to Tom's point, dependent on the specific vertical that we're talking about. So, the majority of manufacturers that I've worked with have not been nearly that complex, but I've seen pieces of that play themselves out, even in kind of the more simplified, discrete manufacturing businesses that I've been involved with in my past.
Yeah, amazing insights there. So I have one more question for Tom. Tom, I don't know if you would like to cover this, so I'm actually going to read it for you, and probably we are going to go with everyone with their opinion if they are going to have any sort of insights on this question or the other questions. So here, Sneha saying, I'm very interested in the panel's thoughts on complications they have seen handling reserving inventory that involves sending order for outside processing. And I completely agree. Anything that is going to be related to either 3PL or outside processing, the commitment is going to be extremely tricky to work with. So Tom, any insights there?
Yeah, I saw that question come up, and hi, Sneha. Haven't seen or talked to you for a while, but glad to see you're out there and see your question. The first thing that occurred to me as I read it was, is this third party providing this manufacturing or assembly service, are they responsible for the procurement of all the materials themselves? In which case, there's not a great deal of additional complexity, just they need to be clear to you on what their forecast is of completing that production order or work order, and being able to either return the product to you or to, in effect, drop ship it directly to the customer. So that question of who's providing the materials that go into this work order or production order, therein lies some complexity. If you, the manufacturer or the owner of, I guess, the end customer relationship, if your company is the one procuring materials and providing them to a third party manufacturer who is then performing this service and then perhaps drop shipping, I mean, there's a whole lot of additional complexity there, right? Your own timetables, your own system of that has dates for all those different materials, and are you going to ship all of that complete, or could you ship it as available? Would you even have the vendors that you're procuring from drop ship to your 3PL and then bill you for the materials that you are buying on behalf of your 3PL? Then are they assembling that, working that production order, ultimately delivering directly to the customer? I mean, there could be multiple layers of complexity that introduce a lot of allocation questions and challenges in terms of both what's your commitment to the end customer in that process I just outlined, that double drop ship and you providing materials to your 3PL scenario. So there would be quite a challenge involved, and probably some very close collaboration required with your 3PL. And perhaps you'd even want them to be using your system, if you could, to help reduce the amount of potential for miscommunication or confusion. If you could treat that 3PL more like a plant that's part of your business network, and you're procuring materials that are shipped to that plant, and then they are providing a service that is in some sense a work order that's in your ERP, and then they are delivering to the end customer, you would have visibility to the complete supply chain and be able to come up with a promise date or a commit date to your customer and be able to allocate and make some of the critical decisions that I was describing there. But just that little example has loads of complexity, and I'm sure there's many other things my colleagues here could call out and say, yeah, it's worse than you think, Tom. It's worse than you've said, that scenario. But yeah, there's great challenges there depending on your business process.
Okay, amazing insights there. So we are going to open up the floor a little bit so you guys can comment whenever you like on whichever questions as you like. So we have the question from the user, and this is the real problem, which is going to be reserving inventory when it is going to be in transit. I don't know if anybody is going to have any insights. Anyone want to take this?
I can.
Okay.
I want to try to field this one, Sam, and I'm not positive I fully understand, because if this relates to what Sneha was saying in terms of a subassembly going out, we had a situation in a facility that I was in, and it wasn't so much on a subassembly standpoint, more on the raw material side, but we had a situation where we were sending some raw material out to be processed before it came back to be continued to be processed before being sent to the customer. And what we ended up having to do, because it was really getting confusing, this happened to be a raw material that was one of the larger movers of the facility, and so it was creating an issue where we weren't sure what did we actually have on hand as compared to what was allocated and work in process for this particular group of orders. And this was an ongoing situation for about a 3 or 4 month period of time. So it was kind of creating a real issue. What we ended up doing to kind of solve it was beyond the allocation, we were actually just consuming the material on the front end of it to try to clear up the allocated and to true up physical inventory or perpetual inventory rather, to make sure that we had a clear picture of what physical inventory had left. So, I'm not sure if in Sneha's scenario in particular, if something like that can be looked at, kind of back to what Tom said about being able to, have full visibility on the supply chain. It depends on how involved your look into that subassembly, that 3PL, how involved you need to look into their supply chain. And then my other point to what Suresh was asking, if it's on the incoming side of things, it becomes much easier because you can utilize a tool like, again, Tom had pointed out with the ATP, where it's looking beyond what is already, in inventory, so to speak, to say, do we have anything in transit coming in that can be allocated in the sales order / work order, creation process. So that's kind of my takeaway on those two particular things. Happy to hear from anybody else, though.
I was going to say, I'd like to jump in for just a minute to kind of add to what Dave was saying. I think all of these are very good points. I would also say a lot of reserving inventory while in transit and subassembly processes very much go to a conversation that we actually had with Sam last week about scheduling, right? Like, I don't think that you can successfully do any of that without understanding what the schedule looks like as you're going through these processes and understanding what a reliable lead time, if you will, of when things are supposed to come in and things that go in and out for subassembly and sub-process component. And in order to be successful, that needs to be part of the larger conversation. But I will let you guys continue to talk. Abu?
Yeah, I was saying, in transit, generally, I would assume Suresh is referring to the incoming inventory, what Dave referred at the end. You have available promise, but some systems will also allow you to, if you're doing a sales order and you want to reserve it, you can issue and lock a purchase order against the sales order, for example. Or you can issue a purchase order and lock it to a work order, for example, in your manufacturing environment. That would be one way to do it. It's harder to do it after the fact. And again, there may be some systems out there that may allow you to do it, but if you have not locked it in the initial front end process, then it's hard to know, what kind of lots or those kind of things are before you can lock in the product for internal.
Okay. Any other insights, Tom? Would you like to touch this question or any other questions?
Well, again, the point about in transit, I think, as Dave and Abu, I mean, all of us have said, I think has to do with incoming and, we talked a little bit about ATP and how it can handle that based on scheduled dates for goods to arrive that aren't in inventory yet. But one of the things that I think is also valuable to keep in mind is the dynamic nature of all of this. When we're talking about allocation, it sounds like, well, that's locked. And people have used the word locked a couple of times in the hour we've spent here. But orders get canceled and inventory gets written off and lost in cycle counts. We discover, oh, it's not there. Or we discover that there's more there than we realized. Purchase orders get canceled or they get increased. They become late and past due. So there's all kinds of changes happening in terms of the supply and the demand. So when I think of allocation processes, I think of it not necessarily as a one-time and it's the decision's been made, but that this is an ongoing decision, and it is at a minimum, something that you're going to be revisiting in a fairly fast-changing business on a daily basis, if not multiple times a day, if not completely dynamically. But the reallocation, I talked about my extreme example of reallocation, disassembling things, but even in more conventional scenarios, right? With orders, customers canceling orders, suddenly someone in the back of the queue should get a new available to promise date because inventory has freed up and you can meet the commitment sooner. You can allocate inventory that's in stock rather than relying on a purchase order that's weeks away. And you can send an acknowledgement to the customer that it's suddenly more available, and vice versa. If we have this scenario where somebody from that big customer calls the CEO of your company and says, "I really need X," and that's a higher priority than all the other customer orders that are already in the queue. Well, when that order is prioritized and it grabs the inventory that's available, all the other customers that were ahead of that order in the queue, but now are behind it, are going to have the ATP process run again, and new promise dates or commitment dates, new allocations decided and then communicated to the customer. So this is an ongoing process of reconfirming, maybe hopefully most of the time just reconfirming without sending communications out to customers constantly, but reconfirming that, yes, what I thought yesterday and the day before is still true. But oftentimes, there will be a lot of movement on the edges and maybe beyond the edges that needs to be handled. So I think of it as an ongoing minimum daily cycle of recommitting, reallocating, rerunning ATP.
Amazing insights there. So the only thing we can take right now is going to be any closing comments that you wanted to cover that you felt that Sam never asked the question that you wanted him to ask. So this is your opportunity to address that, or any sort of closing advice. Dave Griffith, I'll start with you. Dave Griffith, are you still with us? You have a little leg there, I can see.
Yep,
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Sam. There was just the slightest bit of lag.
Yeah.
I think we did a really good job covering this. Kind of as a bit of a recap on my side, is you need systems that people trust the data if you are going to be successful in any part of business, but certainly in inventory allocation. Inventory allocation means a lot of different things for a lot of different people. You need to decide what it means for your organization and pick a path to move forward, or maybe don't pick a path to move forward. And then, as we've kind of all discussed, all heck breaks loose when you get to the floor and when people actually start touching physical products. So people and processes are going to be more important down there than any bit of technology. If you're missing the people and process, you will not be able to succeed.
Amazing. Love it. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. So, Abu, I'm actually going to come to you. Any closing comments, advice?
I mean, I would say, depending on industry size, design an allocation process which would fit 70 to 80% of your needs. Some people define really stringent processes and then they're breaking it every second day, right? And then becomes a huge mess. So again, identify what will serve your 70-80% of your market efficient and effectively, and then keep that flexibility as well in place for those strange things that happen out there.
Okay, love it. Thank you so much, Abu, for that. Dave Chrysler, closing comments, closing advice.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Kind of like, Dave and Abu both said, but, for me, it's start with the end in mind. What are we trying to do to understand? How do we back into the processes that make sense to do this? And, if you find yourself in a situation where the allocated inventory doesn't seem to ever be correct, back to something I wanted to tease Tom about what he said, physical inventory and perpetual inventory, maybe they don't match. I've never seen that in my time, but the whole point is, right?
I've heard about it. Yeah,
exactly. But the whole point is you've got to check all of those kind of hidden places, right? Open work orders, open sales orders, open purchase orders, partial completions that haven't closed out correctly. All of those things impact what we're talking about. Again, gets down to the processes that you've got with it. Thanks.
Yeah, so since Dave was not respecting my sticker with bold red letter, I'm actually going to put a real lock, and then I'm going to see how you are going to find my inventory. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. Tom, coming to you for your closing comments and advice, please.
Again, I go back to the first thing I said, really, and I think it's in alignment with everything that the whole group has said. Really, there's an optimization that you're trying to achieve. And it goes back to your industry and the behaviors of customers and suppliers and what your objectives are. So if you can think through those things, what do you need to do to succeed in your business? Is it meet as many customer commitments as possible? Is it really watch the financials incredibly closely? Because the orders will come, and that's not really the issue. There's lots of demand. The challenge is financial management and maybe tight margins and so on. So I think you have to understand your industry, your business model, and then you can set policies and strategies for allocation that will optimize or meet your objective.
Insights there. So that's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our digital transformation series for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys are going to be here next week. We are going to come back with another topic. On that note, thanks everyone for your time and insights tonight.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Dave Chrysler, head over to thechrysler.club. It's THECRYSLER.CLUB. If you want to learn more about Dave Griffith, head over to dave-griffith.com. It's DAVE-GRIFFITH.com. If you want to learn more about Abu Asif, head over to pennymanagement.com. It's PANNIMANAGEMENT.com. If you want to learn more about Tom Rodden, follow and connect with him on LinkedIn. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Jeff Lam, who shares his insights on optimizing dock-to-stock ratio of a warehouse. Also, the interview with Andrew Johnson, who discusses the evolution of RFID tags and how RFID technology is no longer limited to tracking high-value assets. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.